The drums had not even stopped beating when Elena Voss felt the whole world tilt beneath her feet. She stood at the front of the crowd, pressed between hundreds of pack members under a sky heavy with silver light, and she watched Alpha Damien Cross walk toward her with slow, deliberate steps. Her heart pounded so hard she thought everyone around her must be able to hear it. This was the night she had waited for since she was a child of 7, watching her mother tell stories about mates and moons and destinies written in starlight. This was the night Damien would finally choose his Luna. She had convinced herself, for years, that it would be her. Damien stopped walking, but he did not stop in front of Elena. He turned, just slightly, just enough, and knelt in front of the woman standing beside her. Ivy Sinclair, her best friend. The crowd gasped, and then the gasp turned into a wave of applause that rolled across the courtyard like thunder. Elena stood frozen, feeling the air leave her lungs in one long, silent rush. She watched Damien take Ivy's hand and press it to his lips, watched the moonlight catch in Ivy's wide, startled eyes, watched her best friend's face shift from confusion into disbelief, into something that looked, unmistakably, like joy. Nobody was looking at Elena. Nobody noticed that she had gone pale, that her hands had curled into fists at her sides, that she was standing so still she might have been carved from stone. She should have expected this. Deep down, some small, practical part of her had always known that Damien's eyes rarely lingered on her the way they lingered on Ivy, but she had built an entire future in her mind anyway, brick by careful brick, and now she watched it collapse in front of 300 witnesses. Ivy Sinclair, Damien announced, his voice carrying easily across the silent courtyard. Will you stand beside me as Luna of the Blackthorn Pack? Ivy's mouth opened, closed, opened again. She turned, just for a heartbeat, and found Elena's eyes in the crowd. There was something apologetic in that look, something almost pleading, as if Ivy herself could not quite believe what was happening and needed her oldest friend to tell her it was real. Elena forced her lips into the shape of a smile. It felt like tearing paper. Yes, Ivy finally said, and the courtyard exploded into celebration. People surged forward to congratulate the new Luna-elect, and Elena was swept sideways by the crowd, pushed further and further from the center of attention, until she found herself standing alone, near the edge of the gathering, beneath the shadow of an old oak tree. She pressed her back against the rough bark and closed her eyes, trying to breathe through the tight, burning feeling in her chest. She would not cry, not here, not where anyone could see. You look like you need air, said a voice beside her. Elena opened her eyes to find Grace Whitmore, one of the pack's younger warriors, watching her with a careful, sympathetic expression. Grace had never been close to Elena, but there was something honest in the way she spoke, no pity dressed up as concern, just simple recognition. I'm fine, Elena said too quickly. Grace raised an eyebrow but did not push. The Alpha's choices don't always make sense to the rest of us, she said quietly. The goddess works in strange ways. Sometimes what looks like the end of something is only the start of something else. Elena almost laughed. It was the kind of thing people said to soften a blow, the kind of comfort that meant nothing when your whole heart was breaking in front of a crowd of witnesses. She thanked Grace anyway, and slipped away into the darker paths at the edge of the pack grounds, needing distance, needing quiet, needing to be anywhere the celebration could not reach her. The forest was cool and silver under the full moon. Elena walked without any particular direction, letting her feet carry her along familiar trails, past the training grounds where she had sparred beside Damien 100 times, past the creek where she and Ivy used to sit and talk for hours about nothing at all. Every place held a memory now stained with the ache of tonight. She stopped at last beside the old stone well near the northern border, a place few pack members visited anymore, since the newer well had been built closer to the village center. She sat on its worn edge and let herself, finally, in complete privacy, cry. The tears came fast and hot, and she did not try to stop them. She cried for the years she had spent hoping, for the future she had quietly built in her imagination, for the sting of watching Damien's lips brush against another woman's hand, while the whole pack cheered. She cried until her chest ached and her throat felt raw, and only then, slowly, did the tears begin to slow. That was when she noticed the light. At first she thought it was only the moon, its usual pale glow reflecting off the water inside the well. But as she leaned forward to look, she realized the light was not coming from above. It was coming from below, from somewhere deep inside the well itself, a faint silver shimmer pulsing gently like a heartbeat. Elena's breath caught. She leaned closer, peering down into the darkness, and the light pulsed brighter, as though responding to her attention. A strange warmth spread across her skin, starting at her wrist and crawling up her arm, and she gasped, pulling back sharply. She looked down at her wrist. Nothing was there. No mark, no light, nothing but her own pale skin in the moonlight. She told herself she had imagined it, that grief and exhaustion were playing tricks on her mind, and she stood, brushing the dirt from her clothes, determined to put the strange moment behind her. She did not sleep well that night. She lay awake in her small room, at the edge of the pack house, staring at the ceiling, replaying the ceremony over and over in her mind, wondering what she could have done differently, wondering if there had ever been a version of tonight where Damien knelt in front of her instead. She told herself it did not matter now. It was decided. Ivy would be Luna, and Elena would learn to live with that, the way she had learned to live with every other disappointment life had handed her. Sometime near dawn, exhaustion finally pulled her under, and she slept without dreaming. She woke to sunlight streaming through her window and a strange, unfamiliar heat on her wrist. Elena sat up quickly, pulling her arm out from under the blanket, and stared. There, on the inside of her wrist, was a mark she had never seen before. A thin, delicate crescent moon, silver in color, glowing faintly even in the bright morning light. It was warm to the touch, not painful, but strange, like a low current of energy humming just beneath her skin. She scrubbed at it with her other hand, certain it must be paint or ink left over from some prank, but it did not smear or fade. It was part of her now, embedded somehow in her very skin, and the longer she stared at it, the more she became convinced that this was no trick of the light and no trick of the mind. This was the same light she had seen in the well. Panic rose in her chest, quick and sharp. What was happening to her? She thought of every story she had ever heard about marks and magic within the pack, trying to recall if any of them mentioned anything like this, but nothing came to mind. Marks like this did not simply appear overnight. They meant something, and Elena had no idea what. She pulled her sleeve down over her wrist and forced herself to get dressed, to move through the motions of an ordinary morning, telling herself she would figure this out quietly, privately, without drawing any attention to herself. The last thing she needed, on the morning after Damien chose someone else as his Luna, was for the whole pack to notice something strange happening to her. She could already imagine the whispers, as if her broken heart were not humiliation enough. The pack house was buzzing with excitement when she made her way downstairs. Preparations for Ivy's official Luna ceremony had already begun, banners being hung along the main hall, flowers being arranged in tall vases, the scent of fresh bread drifting from the kitchens. Elena moved through it all like a ghost, nodding politely when spoken to, offering small smiles that never quite reached her eyes. She found Ivy in the garden behind the pack house, sitting alone on a stone bench, looking unusually pensive for someone who had just been chosen as future Luna. When Ivy noticed her approaching, her face lit up with relief. "Elena," she said, standing quickly, "I have been looking for you all morning. I wanted to talk to you before anyone else." Elena forced herself to smile. "You don't have to explain anything to me," she said. "I'm happy for you." Ivy studied her for a long moment, her expression uncertain. "Are you? Because I know how you feel about him. I know how long you've—" She stopped herself, glancing around to make sure no one else could hear. "I never meant for this to happen. I promise you, Elena. I never once tried to draw his attention. I don't understand it either." And that, at least, Elena believed. Ivy had never shown the slightest interest in Damien, had in fact spent years listening patiently while Elena talked about him, offering advice, offering hope, offering the quiet support of a true friend. There was no betrayal in what had happened last night, only an accident of fate, the strange and uncontrollable pull of whatever force decided who belonged with whom. "I believe you," Elena said, and she meant it. "It's not your fault. It's nobody's fault. It's just how things turned out." Ivy reached out and squeezed her hand, and for a moment the old easy comfort between them returned, familiar and warm. "You're still my best friend," Ivy said quietly, "no matter what title I have. That doesn't change." Elena nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat, and changed the subject before her emotions could betray her further. They talked instead about the preparations for the Luna ceremony, about the dress Ivy would wear, about which pack elders would perform the ritual. It was easier, Elena found, to focus on details than on feelings, and by the time she left Ivy in the garden an hour later, she felt almost steady again. Almost. Because the mark on her wrist had not stopped humming. She spent the rest of the day trying to distract herself with chores, with errands, with anything that might keep her mind too busy to dwell on either her broken heart or the strange mark she could not explain. But every so often, in quiet moments, she would catch herself staring at her sleeve, feeling that faint warmth pulse beneath the fabric, and a shiver would run down her spine. That evening, as the sun began to set and the pack house grew quiet, with the peaceful exhaustion of a long day, Elena decided to visit old Mother Agatha. Agatha was the pack's oldest living member, a woman who had outlived 3 alphas and countless generations of pack history, keeper of stories and traditions that most younger wolves had long forgotten. She lived alone in a small cottage at the edge of the woods, surrounded by shelves of old books and jars of dried herbs, and though most pack members visited her only when tradition required it, Elena had always found comfort in the old woman's quiet wisdom. She knocked on the cottage door just as the last light of evening faded into darkness. Agatha opened it slowly, her sharp eyes taking in Elena's face with the kind of careful attention that made Elena feel, for a moment, as though the old woman could see straight through her. "Elena Voss," Agatha said, stepping aside to let her in. "I wondered when you might come." Elena blinked, surprised. "You were expecting me?" "I felt something shift in the air last night," Agatha said, closing the door behind her. "An old kind of magic, one I have not felt in this pack for a very long time. Sit, child. Tell me what happened to you." Elena hesitated only a moment before pulling back her sleeve and holding out her wrist. The crescent mark glowed faintly in the dim candlelight of the cottage, and Agatha's sharp intake of breath told Elena everything she needed to know. This was not nothing. "Where did you see this begin?" Agatha asked, her voice unusually careful. "At the old well," Elena said. "Last night, after the ceremony, I saw a light inside the water, and then my wrist felt warm, and this morning, this was here." Agatha lowered herself slowly into a chair across from Elena, her expression distant, thoughtful, as though she were sorting through decades of memory in search of something long buried. The silence stretched between them, heavy and expectant, until finally the old woman spoke. "There is a story," Agatha said quietly, "that most in this pack have long forgotten. A story about the moon goddess herself and the rare souls she chooses to walk beside her, separate from any alpha, separate from any Luna. They are called the Selected, and they appear only once in many generations, marked by a crescent moon upon the skin, drawn forward by moonlight when their hearts are at their most open and most vulnerable." Elena stared at her, disbelief and something else, something like hope, warring inside her chest. "That's just an old legend," she said. "A bedtime story." "Legends are often older truths wearing simpler clothes," Agatha said. "I have lived a very long time, Elena, and I have never seen a mark like this on anyone. Not once. Until now." Elena pulled her sleeve back down over her wrist, suddenly uncomfortable, as though the mark had become heavier the moment someone else acknowledged its existence. "I don't want this," she said quietly. "I don't want to be chosen for anything. I just want my life to go back to normal." Agatha's expression softened with something close to sympathy. "I understand," she said. "Grief makes strange gifts feel like burdens, but I would advise you, child, to tell no one else of this. Not yet. Let us understand what it means before the whole pack begins to whisper." Elena nodded, grateful for the old woman's discretion, and rose to leave. But as she reached the door, Agatha spoke once more, her voice quiet but firm. "The goddess does not choose without reason," she said. "Whatever this becomes, Elena, know that it did not happen to punish you. It happened because she saw something in you worth choosing." Elena walked home beneath a sky full of stars, her mind spinning with questions she had no answers to. Behind her, the pack house glowed with warm light and the sound of laughter, preparations for tomorrow's Luna ceremony still underway. Ahead of her, the future stretched out unknown and uncertain. She did not yet understand what the mark on her wrist truly meant. She did not yet understand that the very forest around her seemed to lean toward her as she passed, that the owls in the trees had gone quiet and watchful, that somewhere far beyond the pack's borders, an ancient and powerful attention had, for the first time in generations, turned its gaze toward a single, ordinary young woman walking home alone beneath the moon. All Elena knew, as she climbed the stairs to her room and finally let herself fall into an uneasy sleep, was that nothing about her life would ever be simple again. The Luna ceremony was scheduled for midday, when the sun sat highest above the pack grounds, and by the time Elena made her way to the main hall, the entire pack had already gathered in their finest clothes. She stood near the back, close enough to see, far enough to remain unnoticed, and watched as Ivy walked down the center aisle, in a gown of pale silver, her dark hair braided with small white flowers. Damien waited at the front, dressed in ceremonial black, and when Ivy reached him, he took both her hands in his, and smiled at her, with an expression Elena had once hoped he would wear for her. She swallowed the sting of it, and forced herself to keep watching, refusing to look away, refusing to let anyone see, even a flicker of the ache still living inside her chest. The pack elder leading the ceremony, a stern older man named Caleb Ashford, raised his hands for silence. "We gather today," he began, "to witness the joining of Alpha Damien Cross and Luna-elect Ivy Sinclair, blessed by the moon goddess herself, bound by fate and by choice." As he spoke the ritual words, a low murmur rippled through the crowd. Elena felt it before she understood it, a strange pressure building in the air, like the moments before a storm breaks. She glanced around, but no one else seemed to notice anything unusual, their attention fixed entirely on the couple at the front of the hall. Then Ivy swayed. It was subtle at first, barely visible, but Elena's eyes had been trained by years of friendship to notice the smallest shifts in Ivy's posture. Ivy's hand tightened around Damien's, her knuckles going white, and a thin sheen of sweat appeared on her forehead despite the cool air inside the hall. "Are you well?" Damien murmured, his voice low enough that only those closest could hear, but Elena, standing near enough, caught the words clearly. Ivy nodded quickly, too quickly, and forced a smile. "I'm fine," she whispered. "Please, continue." Caleb Ashford, either not noticing or choosing not to acknowledge the exchange, pressed forward with the ceremony, invoking the old words that bound Luna to her pack, to her alpha, to the responsibilities that would now define the rest of her life. Elena watched Ivy's face carefully throughout, noticing the way her friend's smile seemed to strain a little more with each passing minute, the way her breathing had grown shallow and quick. By the time the ceremony ended and the crowd erupted into applause, Ivy looked almost gray beneath her careful makeup. She managed to remain standing through the congratulations that followed, through the long line of pack members eager to greet their new Luna, but Elena could see the effort it cost her, the way her hand occasionally drifted to press against her stomach, as though something inside her had gone wrong. It was nearly evening before Elena finally managed to find Ivy alone, resting in a private sitting room adjoining the main hall, away from the noise of the ongoing celebration. Ivy sat curled in a large armchair, still wearing her ceremonial gown, looking smaller and more fragile than Elena had ever seen her. "You don't look well," Elena said, closing the door behind her. Ivy attempted a smile, but it faded quickly. "I feel strange," she admitted. "Ever since the ceremony began, something has felt wrong, like there's a weight pressing down on my chest that won't go away." Elena crossed the room and knelt beside the chair, taking her friend's hand. It was cold, colder than it should have been given the warmth of the room. "Have you told Damien?" "He's busy with the celebration," Ivy said. "I didn't want to worry him. It's probably just nerves. This is a lot to take on all at once." But Elena had seen Ivy nervous before, had watched her friend navigate stressful situations with far more composure than this. This felt different, deeper, something that nerves alone could not explain. She thought of the strange pressure she had felt during the ceremony, the murmur that had rippled through the crowd, and a small, uneasy suspicion began to form in the back of her mind. She did not voice it, not yet. Instead, she stayed with Ivy through the evening, bringing her water and quiet company, until color slowly returned to her friend's face, until the strange heaviness in the room seemed, gradually, to ease. By the time Elena finally left for her own room, Ivy had fallen into a restless but peaceful sleep, and the immediate crisis, whatever it had been, seemed to have passed. But it did not stay away for long. Over the following days, whispers began to circulate through the pack. Ivy had grown thin and pale, unable to keep down more than small portions of food, plagued by nightmares that left her too exhausted to properly perform her new duties as Luna. She tried to hide it, tried to smile through the fatigue and press forward with her responsibilities, but exhaustion had a way of showing itself no matter how carefully one tried to conceal it. Damien grew increasingly concerned, calling in the pack's healer, a quiet, capable woman named Lydia Fairwood, to examine his new Luna. Lydia's examinations, however, turned up nothing. No illness, no injury, no explanation for the strange weakness that had settled over Ivy like a shadow she could not shake. "There is nothing wrong with her body," Lydia told Damien privately, though word of the conversation eventually reached Elena through the pack's ever-present rumor mill. "Whatever is happening to her, it is not something medicine can fix." Elena found herself thinking constantly of the strange pressure she had felt during the ceremony, of the murmur that had rippled through the crowd at the exact moment Ivy first swayed. She thought, too, of Agatha's words about the moon goddess and her selected, about bonds recognized rather than forced, and a theory began to take shape in her mind that she was almost too afraid to consider. What if the bond between Damien and Ivy had never truly been blessed at all? She returned to Agatha's cottage on a quiet afternoon, finding the old woman exactly where she always seemed to be, seated near her window with a book open on her lap, though Elena suspected she rarely needed to actually read the words anymore. "Ivy is unwell," Elena said, settling into the chair across from Agatha without waiting for an invitation. "The healer can find nothing wrong with her. It started during the ceremony, the moment the alpha bond was meant to form." Agatha closed her book slowly, her expression unreadable. "And you believe this is connected to your mark?" It was not really a question, and Elena did not pretend otherwise. "I felt something strange during the ceremony too, right before Ivy first seemed unwell, like pressure in the air, like something resisting. The old stories say," Agatha began carefully, "that a false bond, one forced by circumstance rather than truth, can never fully settle. The body and the spirit know what the ceremony does not always account for. If the goddess's true intention lies elsewhere, a bond built against that intention will always strain against itself, weakening the one forced to carry it." Elena felt a chill crawl up her spine. "You're saying the bond between Damien and Ivy isn't real?" "I am saying," Agatha replied carefully, "that something is preventing it from settling as it should. Whether that is connected to your mark, I cannot say with certainty, but it would be a very large coincidence if it were not." Elena sat in silence for a long moment, turning the old woman's words over in her mind. If Agatha was right, if the strange weakness plaguing Ivy truly stemmed from some deeper wrongness in the bond itself, then the implications were staggering. It would mean the goddess's true intention for Damien lay somewhere else entirely. It would mean the mark on Elena's wrist was not some isolated, unrelated mystery, but something tangled directly into the fate of the two people she cared about most. "What do I do?" she asked quietly. "For now," Agatha said, "nothing. You cannot force understanding before it is ready to arrive. But watch carefully, Elena, and be prepared, when the truth does reveal itself, to face it honestly, whatever shape it takes." Elena left the cottage with more questions than she had arrived with, and over the following weeks, she watched, exactly as Agatha had advised. She watched Ivy grow thinner despite Lydia's careful attention, watched Damien's concern deepen into something close to desperation as he tried every remedy the pack's healers could offer, watched the whispers among pack members grow louder and more anxious with each passing day. She also watched her own mark, which had begun, subtly, to change. The silver crescent no longer merely glowed at odd moments. It seemed to respond, faintly, to the moon's phases, growing brighter as the nights approached the next full moon, humming with a low warmth that Elena had slowly, cautiously, grown accustomed to. She told no one else of it, honoring Agatha's advice to remain quiet, though the effort of hiding such a significant secret weighed on her more heavily than she wanted to admit. She began wearing long sleeves even in warm weather, developed careful habits of angling her wrist away from curious eyes, learned to change the subject smoothly whenever conversations drifted too close to questions she was not ready to answer. It was nearly 3 weeks after the Luna ceremony when everything shifted again. Elena had gone for an early morning walk along the pack's northern border, a habit she had developed in the weeks since the ceremony, finding a strange comfort in the quiet solitude of the forest before the rest of the pack woke. She was halfway along her usual path when she heard rustling in the underbrush ahead, followed by a low, unfamiliar growl. She froze, every instinct sharpening at once. The Blackthorn pack's territory was generally safe, well patrolled, protected by strong borders, but rogue wolves occasionally tested those boundaries, drawn by the scent of unclaimed land, or, more rarely, by the scent of an unprotected pack member wandering too far from the safety of numbers. The growl came again, closer this time, and a shape emerged from the trees ahead of her, lean and dark, eyes gleaming with a hostility that made Elena's blood run cold. She had trained in basic self-defense, as most pack members did, but she had never faced a true threat alone, and the sudden reality of her vulnerability crashed over her all at once. She began backing away slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements that might provoke the creature further, her mind racing through every piece of advice she had ever received about encountering hostile wolves. Do not run. Do not show fear. Make yourself appear larger, more confident than you feel. The rogue wolf lunged. Elena's scream tore from her throat before she could stop it, and in the same instant, without any conscious decision, she threw her arm up in front of her, some deep instinct screaming at her to protect herself however she could. The mark on her wrist blazed to sudden, blinding life. A wave of silver light burst outward from her raised hand, striking the rogue wolf mid-leap and sending it tumbling backward, with a yelp of pain and confusion. The creature scrambled upright, clearly disoriented, and after a moment of frozen hesitation, turned and fled back into the trees, leaving Elena standing alone in the sudden, ringing silence of the forest. She stared at her own hand, trembling, disbelieving. The mark on her wrist still glowed faintly, slowly fading back to its usual quiet shimmer, and Elena's mind struggled to process what had just happened. She had done that. Somehow, impossibly, she had done that. She made her way back to the pack grounds in a daze, her legs shaking with adrenaline and shock. And it was not until she reached the edge of the training fields that she realized she was not alone. A small group of pack warriors, out for early morning drills, had witnessed the tail end of the encounter from a distance, close enough to see the flash of silver light, close enough to see the rogue wolf flee. Their eyes were wide with something between confusion and awe as they stared at her, and Elena understood, in that moment, that her carefully guarded secret had just become impossible to hide any longer. Word of what happened on the northern border spread through the pack faster than Elena could have imagined possible. By the time she reached her own room and had a chance to simply sit and breathe, 3 separate people had already stopped her along the way, eyes wide with questions she was not ready to answer. She gave vague, stammering responses, claiming she wasn't sure what had happened, that everything had moved too fast to understand, and though most seemed to accept this, she could see the doubt lingering behind their eyes. By afternoon, Alpha Damian Cross himself had summoned her. Elena walked to his study with her heart hammering against her ribs, unsure what to expect. She had not spoken privately with Damian since the night of the selection ceremony, had carefully avoided situations that might put them alone together, and the thought of facing him now, with her secret partially exposed, filled her with a dread she could not quite name. The study was warm, lit by a low fire despite the mild weather outside, and Damian stood near the window when she entered, his back to the door. He turned as she stepped inside, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. "Close the door," he said finally. Elena obeyed, her hands trembling slightly as she did. "I heard what happened this morning," Damian said, his voice carefully neutral. The warriors who witnessed it described something none of them had ever seen before. A light. Silver, like moonlight, but stronger, controlled, coming directly from you. Elena said nothing, unsure how much to admit. "Elena," Damian said, more gently this time, "I am not asking as your alpha right now. I am asking as someone who wants to understand what is happening to a member of my pack. What is going on with you?" She hesitated a long moment, weighing Agatha's advice to remain quiet against the impossibility of continuing to hide something that had just been witnessed by 6 trained warriors. The choice, she realized, had effectively already been made for her. She pulled back her sleeve and held out her wrist. Damien's eyes widened as he took in the sight of the glowing crescent mark, and for several long seconds, he simply stared, his expression shifting through disbelief, confusion, and something that looked almost like recognition, as though some deep, ancestral part of him understood the significance of what he was seeing even before his conscious mind could catch up. "When did this appear?" he asked quietly. "The morning after the selection ceremony," Elena admitted. "I saw a strange light in the old well the night before, and by morning, this was here. I don't know what it means. I went to Mother Agatha, and she told me an old story about the moon goddess choosing rare souls to walk beside her. She called it being selected." Damien's jaw tightened. "The selected," he repeated slowly, as though testing the weight of the word. "I have heard the stories too, though I always believed them to be nothing more than legend. My father used to speak of them sometimes, warning that no alpha should ever assume his own authority absolute, that the goddess herself reserved the right to elevate those she found worthy above the structures we build for ourselves." "I don't want any of this," Elena said, her voice cracking slightly. "I don't want power. I don't want attention. I just wanted my life to stay the same." "I understand," Damien said, and something in his tone suggested he genuinely did. "But I do not think either of us has much choice in the matter now." They stood in silence for a long moment, the weight of the situation settling heavily between them. Finally, Damien spoke again, his voice lower, more hesitant than Elena had ever heard it. "Ivy has been unwell since our ceremony," he said. "The healer can find no cause. I have wondered, more than once, if something about our bond went wrong, though I could not explain why I felt that way. Do you think this is connected to what is happening to you?" Elena thought of Agatha's words, of false bonds straining against a truth they could not accommodate, and she hesitated, unsure how much of her theory to share with the very man whose marriage bond was in question. But honesty, she decided, was the only path forward now. "Mother Agatha believes a forced bond cannot fully settle if it goes against what the goddess truly intends," she said carefully. "I don't know for certain if that's what's happening with Ivy, but the timing feels like more than coincidence." Damien's expression darkened, though not with anger, Elena realized, but with something closer to dread. "You're suggesting the goddess never intended for Ivy to be my Luna." "I'm not suggesting anything," Elena said quickly. "I'm only telling you what Agatha said. I don't have answers, Damien. I have a mark I didn't ask for, and a strange kind of light coming out of my hands, and I'm just as confused as you are." Damien studied her for a long moment, and Elena had the uncomfortable sense that he was seeing her clearly for the first time in years, not as Ivy's quiet best friend standing in the background of every gathering, but as someone entirely unknown to him, someone whose depths he had never bothered to explore. "I think," he said slowly, "that we need to speak with the Council of Elders." Elena's stomach dropped. "The whole council? Damien, I'm not ready for that. I don't even understand what this is myself." "That may be exactly why we need them," Damien said. "The elders keep records the rest of us have long forgotten. If there is any information about the selected beyond what Agatha remembers, they will have it. And if what is happening to Ivy is truly connected to your mark, we cannot afford to wait until we understand everything on our own. She is suffering, Elena. Every day this continues unresolved, she grows weaker." Elena knew he was right, even as every instinct in her screamed against the idea of exposing herself further to public scrutiny. She thought of Ivy's pale, exhausted face, of the effort it clearly cost her friend to simply get through each day, and she understood that her own discomfort could not be allowed to matter more than Ivy's well-being. "All right," she said finally. "Call the council." The Council of Elders convened 3 days later, a gathering of 7 of the pack's oldest and most respected members, presided over by Caleb Ashford, who had performed Ivy's Luna ceremony. Elena stood before them in the pack's formal meeting hall, feeling smaller and more exposed than she ever had in her life, Damien standing at her side, Agatha seated among the elders as one of their own. "Show them," Damien said quietly. Elena pulled back her sleeve, and a ripple of murmurs swept through the assembled elders as the crescent mark caught the light of the hall's tall windows. Caleb Ashford leaned forward, his sharp eyes studying the mark with an intensity that made Elena's skin crawl. "How long has this been present?" he asked. "Since the morning after the selection ceremony," Elena said, her voice steadier than she felt. Caleb exchanged a long look with the other elders, several of whom shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "There is a passage," he said slowly, "in the oldest of our pack records, written so long ago that most among us have never had reason to read it. It speaks of a mark exactly as you describe, appearing on those the goddess herself has chosen to elevate above the ordinary bonds of pack hierarchy. We call them the Selected." "Then it's true," Damien said. "The stories are real." "They appear to be," Caleb said gravely. "Though I confess, I never expected to witness such a thing in my own lifetime. The last recorded Selected lived nearly 2 centuries ago, in a pack far from our own territory. Her story ended in great triumph, but also great difficulty, as the pack around her struggled to understand what her presence meant for their traditional structures of power." One of the other elders, an elderly woman named Hannah Marsh, spoke up hesitantly. "If this young woman truly carries the goddess's mark, then her authority within our pack traditions may extend beyond even that of our alpha. This is no small matter, Caleb. We must proceed with great care." Elena felt the weight of every eye in the room settle on her, and she resisted the urge to shrink beneath their scrutiny. "I don't want authority," she said, more firmly than she expected herself capable of. "I only agreed to come here because Ivy is suffering, and I want to understand if there's a connection between her illness and whatever is happening to me." Caleb's expression softened slightly at that. "A fair concern, and one this council shares. Tell me, has anyone examined the nature of the bond between your Alpha and his Luna beyond simple physical illness?" "The healer found nothing wrong with her body," Damien said. "Whatever is happening, it is not something medicine alone can address." Caleb nodded slowly, as though this confirmed something he had already begun to suspect. "There is an old test," he said, "used in ancient times to determine the true nature of a bond, whether it was born of genuine fate or merely circumstance and expectation. It requires the presence of all 3 parties involved. Would your Luna be willing to undergo such a test?" Damien hesitated only a moment before nodding. "If it might help her, yes." Ivy was summoned to the hall within the hour, arriving pale and clearly confused about the sudden gathering, though she said nothing, as she took in the assembled elders and the grave expressions surrounding her. When her eyes landed on Elena, standing beside Damien with her sleeve still pushed back to reveal the glowing mark, her confusion deepened into something closer to shock. "Elena," she breathed. "What is that?" "I'll explain everything," Elena promised quietly. "But right now, they want to run some kind of test, to understand what's happening to you." Ivy's gaze flickered between Elena, Damien, and the row of solemn elders, and though fear was evident in her eyes, she nodded slowly. "All right," she said. "Whatever it takes to understand this." Caleb instructed the 3 of them to stand together at the center of the hall, forming a small triangle, while he retrieved an ancient, leather-bound book from among the council's private collection. He read from it in a language Elena did not recognize, old and formal, the words falling from his lips like something ceremonial and sacred. As he spoke, a faint silver mist began to gather in the air above them, swirling slowly, forming shapes that none of them could quite interpret. Elena felt her mark grow warm again, pulsing steadily in time with the rhythm of Caleb's words, and beside her, she saw Ivy's face grow paler, her breathing shallow and quick, exactly as it had during the Luna ceremony weeks earlier. The mist above them shifted, thickened, and slowly began to separate, one thin strand curling toward Damien, another curling, unmistakably, toward Elena, leaving Ivy standing alone at the edge of the formation, untouched by either strand of silver light. The hall fell utterly silent. Caleb closed the book slowly, his expression grave, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. "The bond formed at the selection ceremony," he said, "was never truly blessed by the goddess. It was chosen by circumstance, by expectation, by the pressures of tradition, but not by fate itself. The true bond the ritual reveals lies elsewhere." Ivy stumbled backward, one hand pressed to her chest, and Damien moved instinctively to steady her, though his eyes remained fixed on Elena with an expression she could not fully read. "I'm sorry," Ivy whispered, tears filling her eyes, though whether from relief or grief, Elena could not tell. "I felt it, all this time. I felt like something inside me was fighting against itself, and I didn't understand why. I thought something was wrong with me. Nothing is wrong with you, Elena said quickly, moving to her friend's side, despite the tension crackling through the hall. None of this is your fault, Ivy. None of it. Caleb raised his hands, calling for order, as murmurs began to ripple through the small gathering of elders. This changes a great deal, he said gravely. A Luna bond formed against the goddess's true intention cannot be sustained without continuing harm to the one forced to carry it. For your own well-being, Ivy Sinclair, the bond must be released. Ivy nodded slowly, wiping at her eyes, and Elena saw something shift in her friend's posture, a heaviness lifting, even as the room around them buzzed with the enormity of what had just been revealed. Damien, for his part, remained silent for a long moment, his gaze moving slowly from Ivy to Elena and back again, as though trying to reconcile the reality now placed before him with everything he had believed just weeks earlier. I never meant to hurt either of you, he said finally, his voice rough with something that sounded almost like guilt. I chose based on expectation, on what I believed a proper Luna should be. I never stopped to ask what my own heart actually recognized as true. Elena said nothing, unsure how to respond, unsure what any of this meant for the tangled feelings still living inside her own chest. She had spent so long wanting Damien's attention, and now that the strange ritual mist had pointed so clearly in her direction, she found herself feeling not triumph, but something far more complicated, a mixture of vindication and fear and uncertainty about what came next. Caleb cleared his throat, drawing the room's attention back to more immediate matters. There is much still to determine, he said. The nature of Elena's mark, the full scope of her role as selected, and the proper path forward for our pack's leadership. This council will need time to consult the old records more thoroughly. In the meantime, I would ask all three of you to exercise patience and discretion. This news, handled carelessly, could cause significant unrest among our people. They agreed, each in their own quiet way, and the meeting dispersed slowly, the elders filing out with hushed, urgent conversations already beginning among them. Elena remained behind for a moment, watching Damien gently guide a still-shaken Ivy toward the door, and she felt the strange, hollow ache of watching two people she cared about navigate a crisis she had somehow, without ever intending to, caused. She did not yet know what role the goddess intended for her to play in the story now unfolding around her, but she understood, standing alone in the quiet, emptying hall, that there was no path back to the simple, ordinary life she had once taken for granted. News of the council's ruling did not stay contained for long, despite Caleb Ashford's careful warnings about discretion. Within 2 days, whispers had spread through every corner of the pack grounds, twisting and multiplying as they passed from one mouth to another, until the truth had become tangled with rumor, almost beyond recognition. Some said Elena had cast some kind of dark magic on Ivy to steal the Alpha's affection. Others said Ivy had never truly wanted to be Luna at all, and had simply staged an elaborate escape from a role she found overwhelming. Very few of the stories bore much resemblance to what had actually happened in that quiet, formal hall. Elena found herself unable to walk through the pack grounds without feeling the weight of curious eyes following her every movement. Some looked at her with open suspicion, wary of the strange, unexplained power she now visibly carried. Others looked at her with something closer to awe, murmuring the word selected, as though it were both a blessing and a warning. She missed, more than she expected to, the simple invisibility of her old life, when she had been nothing more than Ivy's quiet best friend, unremarkable and unnoticed. Ivy, meanwhile, had begun to recover with startling speed. Within a day of the bond's release, color had returned to her cheeks, and by the end of the week, she looked more like herself than she had since the night of her Luna ceremony. She threw herself into helping Elena navigate the strange new attention now surrounding her, staying close by her side whenever possible, deflecting the worst of the pack's gossip with the same quiet loyalty she had always shown. "You don't have to do this," Elena told her one evening, as they sat together in Elena's small room, a pot of tea cooling between them. "You've been through enough. You don't need to spend your energy protecting me from gossip." "I want to," Ivy said simply. "You've spent years supporting me through everything, Elena. Let me return the favor now." Elena smiled, grateful, though a small ache remained beneath her gratitude. "Are you truly all right with everything that happened?" Ivy considered the question carefully before answering. "I think I am, actually. It's strange to admit, but ever since the bond was released, I've felt lighter than I have in months. I think some part of me always knew something wasn't right, even before I understood why. I was so caught up in the honor of being chosen that I never let myself really examine how exhausted I felt, how much effort it took just to get through each day. Do you resent me? Elena asked quietly, voicing the fear that had been sitting uncomfortably in her chest since the council's ruling. For whatever it is the goddess seems to want between me and Damien. Ivy reached across the small table and took her hand. Elena, I could never resent you for something neither of us chose. If anything, I feel relieved. I never wanted a bond that wasn't real, no matter how honored I felt by the title attached to it. And honestly, watching you now, seeing this strange, powerful mark on your wrist, I find myself thinking that maybe this was always meant to be your story, not mine. Elena squeezed her friend's hand, grateful beyond words for the steady loyalty that had survived even this strangest of tests. What will you do now? Ivy was quiet for a long moment, staring down at their joined hands. I've been thinking about that, she admitted. For so long, my entire sense of purpose was tied to becoming Luna, to fulfilling that role well. Now that it's gone, I find myself wondering what I actually want, separate from anyone else's expectations. I think I'd like to travel, maybe visit some of the neighboring packs, learn more about how they structure their communities. There's a whole world beyond these borders I've never really explored. That sounds wonderful, Elena said, and meant it, even as a small part of her mourned the thought of her closest friend venturing far from her side during such an uncertain time. As if sensing her thoughts, Ivy squeezed her hand once more. I'm not leaving immediately, she said gently. Not until I know you're settled into whatever this new life looks like for you. I promised you. Remember? Best friends, no matter what titles come and go. They sat together in comfortable silence for a while after that, the weight of recent events settling more gently between them, now that honesty had cleared away the awkwardness that might otherwise have poisoned their friendship. It was, Elena thought, one small mercy amid the chaos of everything else, that whatever the goddess had planned for her future, she would not have to face it without Ivy's steady presence beside her. Damien, for his part, kept a careful, respectful distance in the days following the council's ruling, though Elena caught him watching her more than once across the pack grounds, his expression thoughtful and difficult to read. She understood his hesitation. The revelation that their true bond had been pointed to by ancient ritual magic did not erase the awkward, complicated history between them, did not undo the sting of the public rejection she had endured just weeks earlier, did not simplify the tangled feelings now sitting uneasily in both their chests. She was not ready to examine those feelings too closely herself, focused instead on the more immediate challenge of understanding what being selected actually meant for her daily life. Agatha became a frequent companion during this period, patiently walking Elena through what fragments of old pack history existed regarding previous selected individuals, though the records were frustratingly sparse. The stories agree on certain things, Agatha explained one afternoon, as they sat together in her cluttered cottage, surrounded by open books and yellowed scrolls. The selected are marked to serve as a kind of check on alpha authority, a reminder that pack leadership answers to something greater than tradition or bloodline. Historically, they have possessed abilities tied to moonlight and protection, defensive rather than offensive in nature, meant to safeguard the pack rather than to conquer or dominate. That explains what happened with the rogue wolf, Elena mused. The light seemed to come naturally, almost like instinct, the moment I felt threatened. Precisely, Agatha said. Your power appears bound to genuine need, to moments of true danger or injustice. This is consistent with what little the old records describe. I suspect, as time passes and your bond with this new role deepens, you will find your control over these abilities growing more deliberate, less purely instinctual. Elena turned her wrist over, studying the crescent mark that had become such a strange, constant companion in recent weeks. Will it ever stop feeling foreign? She asked quietly. Like something happening to me rather than something that's actually mine? Agatha's expression softened with genuine sympathy. I cannot promise you that, child. But I can tell you that every account I have found describes the selected eventually coming to view their gifts not as burdens imposed upon them, but as extensions of who they already were, brought to the surface by circumstances that demanded their emergence. You did not become someone new the night that Mark appeared, Elena. You simply became visible in a way you had not been before. The words settled somewhere deep in Elena's chest, offering a small measure of comfort amid the ongoing uncertainty of her new reality. She thought of the years she had spent standing quietly in the background, supporting others, rarely asking for attention or recognition of her own. Perhaps, she considered, there had always been more strength inside her than she had ever allowed herself to acknowledge, simply waiting for circumstances that demanded she finally let it show. That evening, as she walked back toward the pack house, beneath a sky just beginning to darken toward the coming full moon, she found Damien waiting for her near the edge of the training fields, his posture carefully casual, in a way that suggested the encounter was anything but accidental. "Do you have a moment?" he asked as she approached. Elena hesitated, but nodded, curiosity outweighing her lingering wariness. "I wanted to apologize properly," Damien said, once they had fallen into step together along the quiet path. "For the selection ceremony, for not seeing what apparently should have been obvious. I spent so many years being told what qualities a proper Luna should possess, so much time listening to my father's expectations about strength and status and suitable pairings, that I think I stopped trusting my own instincts about who I actually connected with." "You don't owe me an apology," Elena said, though her voice wavered slightly. "You didn't know." "Perhaps not," Damien said, "but I still caused you pain, whether I understood the full picture or not, and I would like the chance, if you're willing, to actually get to know you properly. Not as Ivy's friend standing in the background, but as yourself." Elena considered his words carefully, aware of the strange, complicated tangle of emotions still sitting in her chest, the lingering hurt from his rejection, warring with the undeniable pull she had always felt toward him, now further complicated by the ancient magic that had apparently pointed so clearly in his direction. "I'd like that," she said finally. "But slowly, Damien, there's a lot happening right now, and I don't want to rush into anything, especially something as significant as this, simply because an old ritual pointed us toward each other." "Slowly," Damien agreed, and something in his expression, relief mixed with genuine respect, told Elena he meant it sincerely. "Whatever pace you need." They walked together in comfortable silence for a while after that, the tension between them easing gradually into something more tentative and hopeful, and though Elena still carried plenty of uncertainty about what the coming weeks and months might bring, she found herself, for the first time since the night of the selection ceremony, allowing herself to feel something close to cautious optimism. The full moon was 3 days away, and with it, according to Agatha's careful research, would come the natural strengthening of Elena's newly discovered abilities. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she suspected she would need every bit of that strength, and more, to navigate the uncertain path now stretching out before her. The night of the full moon arrived clear and bright, the sky swept clean of clouds, the moon itself hanging low and enormous over the packed grounds, close enough that it seemed almost possible to reach up and touch it. Elena had spent the entire day in restless anticipation, her mark humming steadily beneath her sleeve, growing warmer as the sun sank toward the horizon and the sky began its slow transformation from gold to deep, star-scattered blue. Agatha had suggested she spend the night somewhere quiet, away from the noise and distraction of the main pack grounds, in order to properly experience whatever changes the full moon might bring to her still developing abilities. Elena chose the old well at the northern border, the same place where she had first noticed the strange silver light weeks earlier, feeling a fitting kind of symmetry in returning to where everything had begun. She settled onto the same worn stone edge, watching the moon climb higher into the sky, and felt the mark on her wrist grow warmer with each passing minute, until finally, as the moon reached its highest point, a wave of energy rippled through her entire body, gentle but unmistakable, like a held breath finally released. The forest around her seemed to shift in response. The usual night sounds, insects and distant owls and the rustle of small creatures moving through underbrush, fell into an odd, expectant hush. The water inside the well began to glow, the same silver light she remembered from that first strange night, and this time, instead of pulling back in fear, Elena leaned forward and let herself simply watch. A voice spoke, though not with sound exactly, more a presence that settled directly into her mind, warm and ancient and unmistakably feminine. "You have carried this burden with more grace than you know, child of moonlight." Elena's breath caught. Are you truly the goddess?" "I am what your people have called by that name for many generations," the voice replied, gentle amusement threading through the words. Names matter less than purpose, and my purpose in choosing you was simple. I saw in you a heart capable of carrying great responsibility without losing the humility that makes such responsibility bearable. Power given to those who crave it corrupts easily. Power given to those who never sought it, but who accept it out of genuine care for others, tends toward far greater wisdom. I don't feel wise, Elena admitted quietly. I feel confused, most of the time, overwhelmed. That is precisely why you were chosen, the voice said. Wisdom is not the absence of confusion, but the willingness to act with care despite it. You will face challenges in the days ahead, Elena Voss. Some will test your growing abilities. Others will test the strength of your heart. Trust yourself. You have carried more than you realize already, and you are far more capable than the doubts still lingering in your mind would have you believe. The light in the well pulsed once more, brightly, and Elena felt a surge of warmth spread through her entire body, settling deep into her bones, into the very mark on her wrist, which blazed brilliantly silver for a long moment, before slowly dimming back to its familiar quiet glow. When the light finally faded entirely, Elena remained seated at the edge of the well for a long while, processing what had just happened, turning the goddess's words over carefully in her mind. She did not fully understand everything that had been said, but she felt, for the first time since the mark first appeared, a genuine sense of purpose settling into place beneath her uncertainty. She made her way back toward the pack house well after midnight, and it was during that walk that she first noticed her surroundings responding to her presence in ways she had not consciously commanded. The path beneath her feet seemed to glow faintly, guiding her steps even in the darkness beneath the trees. Small animals that would normally have fled at her approach instead watched her pass with calm, curious eyes. The moonlight itself seemed to follow her more closely than it should have, casting a soft silver halo around her that had nothing to do with simple physics. She was so absorbed in observing these strange, gentle changes that she almost missed the sound of raised voices coming from near the training grounds. Curious, she altered her path slightly, drawn by an instinct she was still learning to trust, and found herself approaching a small cluster of pack warriors gathered in the moonlight, their conversation tense and hushed. Cannot simply hand our authority over to some girl who appeared out of nowhere, one voice was saying, low and angry. Elena recognized it after a moment as belonging to Nathaniel Ford, a senior warrior who had served the pack for many years, known throughout the community for his fierce loyalty to tradition and his deep respect for established hierarchy. The council confirmed her mark themselves, another voice replied, more cautious. This isn't something we get to simply dismiss, Nathaniel. I'm not dismissing the mark, Nathaniel snapped. I'm questioning what it means for the rest of us. Generations of tradition, built carefully around alpha authority, and suddenly we're expected to accept that some outside power can simply override all of it because an old legend says so? What happens to pack stability when authority becomes this uncertain? Elena stood frozen at the edge of the clearing, listening to fears she had not fully considered before, worries that extended beyond her own personal discomfort with sudden attention, into genuine concerns about pack structure and stability. She understood, hearing Nathaniel's frustration, that not everyone would welcome her new role with the same acceptance the Council of Elders had shown. Some, understandably, would see it as a threat to the order they had spent their entire lives trusting. She considered slipping away quietly, unwilling to intrude on a private conversation, but before she could move, one of the other warriors caught sight of her standing at the clearing's edge, and the conversation died abruptly into an uncomfortable silence. Elena, the warrior said, clearly flustered, we didn't realize anyone was nearby. Nathaniel turned, and for a moment, his expression carried open hostility, before he visibly composed himself into something more carefully neutral. Selected, he said, the title carrying a faint edge of skepticism that he made no real effort to hide. Elena stepped forward, deciding that avoiding the confrontation entirely would serve no one well. I heard some of what you said, she admitted. I understand your concerns, Nathaniel. I have many of the same ones myself. He studied her carefully, clearly surprised by her directness. Do you? He said, not quite a question. I never asked for this, Elena continued. I don't want to overturn generations of pack tradition. I don't want to compete with Damien's authority or destabilize anything you've all worked hard to build. I only want to help protect this pack, the same as anyone else here. Whatever power the goddess has given me, I intend to use it in service of that, not in pursuit of some kind of personal ambition. Nathaniel's expression softened, though only slightly, his skepticism clearly not fully dispelled by a single conversation. Words are easy, he said. Time will tell whether your actions match them. That's fair, Elena said. I don't expect trust to be given freely. I only ask for the chance to earn it, the same as anyone would. The warriors exchanged uncertain glances, and though the tension in the clearing did not fully dissolve, something in the atmosphere shifted, softened just slightly by Elena's willingness to engage honestly, rather than assume automatic deference to a title she had not sought. Get some rest, Selected, one of the younger warriors said finally, offering a small, respectful nod before turning to leave. The others followed, Nathaniel, lingering only a moment longer, his expression still guarded, but no longer quite as openly hostile. Elena watched them disperse into the darkness, feeling the weight of the encounter settle heavily in her chest. She understood now, with a clarity that had been missing before, that her new role would not simply be accepted without question by the entire pack. There would be resistance, skepticism, perhaps even active opposition from those who felt threatened by the uncertainty her presence introduced into their carefully ordered world. She thought of the goddess's words, of trusting herself despite the confusion still swirling through her mind, and she resolved, as she finally made her way toward her own bed, in the quiet hours before dawn, that she would meet whatever challenges arose, not with power alone, but with the same patient honesty she had just offered Nathaniel and his companions. It would not be an easy path, but for the first time since the mark first appeared on her wrist, Elena found herself feeling something closer to readiness than fear. Nathaniel Ford's doubts did not vanish after their conversation near the training grounds, but as the days passed, Elena noticed something she had not expected. He began watching her, not with open hostility exactly, but with a kind of careful, measuring attention, as though waiting to see whether her words would eventually be matched by consistent action. She decided this was progress, however small, and continued going about her days with as much quiet consistency as she could manage, helping wherever help was needed, offering her presence at pack gatherings without demanding any special treatment or deference. It was nearly 2 weeks after the full moon, when trouble arrived from an unexpected direction. A message arrived at the pack house early one morning, carried by a messenger wolf from the neighboring Ashwood pack, requesting an urgent meeting between Alpha Damian Cross and their own Alpha, a sharp-eyed man named Marcus Kane, whose reputation for ambition preceded him, even among packs that had never dealt with him directly. Damian called Elena to his study within the hour, his expression grave. "Word of your mark has reached beyond our borders," he told her, once she had settled into the chair across from his desk. "Ashwood is requesting a formal meeting, and though the message doesn't state it directly, I suspect their interest in this meeting has far more to do with you than with any ordinary diplomatic matter." Elena felt a chill settle over her. "What does Ashwood want with me?" "I don't know for certain," Damian admitted, "but Marcus Kane has never been a man to pass up an opportunity for advantage. A selected, marked by the goddess herself, walking among our pack, represents exactly the kind of advantage a man like him would want to understand, and potentially, to claim for his own purposes." "You think he wants to take me from Blackthorn?" Elena said slowly, the full weight of the implication settling over her. "I think," Damian said carefully, "that we should proceed with extreme caution. I will not allow him to simply claim you, Elena. But diplomacy requires care, and outright refusal to meet might provoke exactly the kind of confrontation we're hoping to avoid." They agreed, after careful discussion, that Damian would meet with Marcus Kane at a neutral location along the border between their two territories, accompanied by a small, trusted group of warriors, while Elena remained safely within Blackthorn's borders. Elena chafed slightly at being left behind, feeling that decisions about her own future should not be made entirely without her voice present, but she understood the wisdom in Damian's caution, and reluctantly agreed to the arrangement. The meeting, when it occurred 2 days later, did not go smoothly. Damian returned that evening with a tightness around his eyes that told Elena, before he even spoke a word, that the conversation had not gone well. She found him in his study, staring into the low fire, and waited quietly until he was ready to speak. "Marcus Kane made it very clear," he said finally, that he considers a selected, too significant a resource to remain confined to a single pack's protection. He suggested, with barely veiled threat beneath his diplomatic language, that Ashwood might be willing to test Blackthorn's claim through more direct means if we refuse to consider some kind of formal arrangement. What kind of arrangement? Elena asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. He proposed a challenge, Damien said grimly. Under the old pack laws, rare and significant assets, and yes, Elena, that is the language he used, can be contested through trial by combat, during the next full moon, witnessed and adjudicated by a neutral council of elders from surrounding territories. If Ashwood's chosen champion prevails, Marcus Kane would claim the right to bring you under his own pack's protection, regardless of your own wishes in the matter. Elena felt anger flare hot and sudden in her chest, sharper than the fear that had gripped her only moments before. I am not an asset to be contested over, she said, her voice tight with fury. I am a person. This is exactly the kind of thing I feared when I first realized what this mark meant. People treating me like a prize to be won, rather than someone with her own choices to make. I told him precisely that, Damien said. But old laws, unfortunately, do not always account for modern sensibilities. Marcus Kane is well within his rights to invoke the challenge, and refusing it outright would be seen, under those same old laws, as forfeiting the claim by default. So we have to fight, Elena said slowly. I will fight, Damien said firmly. I will not allow him to simply take you, Elena. Whatever it costs, I will meet his champion under that full moon, and I will win. Elena studied him carefully, seeing the fierce determination in his expression, and felt something warm settle alongside the anger still burning in her chest. But beneath that warmth, a new resolve began to form, one that surprised her with its clarity and strength. No, she said quietly. This isn't only your fight, Damien. This is my life, my future, being contested. I won't stand aside and simply hope you win on my behalf. I've spent this entire journey learning to trust the strength the goddess gave me. It's time I actually used it, deliberately, not just when instinct forces my hand in a moment of panic. Damien's expression shifted through surprise, concern, and finally, something that looked almost like respect. Elena, this challenge, if it comes to that, could be genuinely dangerous. Ashwood's champions are known to be formidable. I understand the risk, Elena said. But I refuse to let my future be decided entirely by other people fighting over me, as though I have no voice in the matter. If there is to be a trial, I want to stand in it myself, alongside you, not hidden safely away while others determine what happens to my own life. They argued the point for a while longer, Damien's protective instincts warring visibly against his growing respect for Elena's determination. But in the end, he relented, recognizing, as Elena had hoped he would, that her resolve was not something to be dismissed or overridden, simply because it made him uneasy. Then we prepare together, he said finally. If Ashwood insists on this challenge, we will face it together, and we will win it together. Elena felt a fierce, steady determination settle over her, replacing the anger and fear that had gripped her only minutes before. She thought of Agatha's careful research, of the goddess's gentle words beside the old well, of Nathaniel Ford's cautious, measuring gaze, as he waited to see whether her actions would match her words. This, she realized, was exactly the kind of moment she had been preparing for, whether she had understood it at the time or not. And she intended to meet it, fully and without hesitation, when the next full moon finally arrived. With only 2 weeks remaining before the next full moon, Elena threw herself into preparation, with an intensity that surprised even her. Damien arranged for her to train daily with the pack's most skilled warriors, learning not only physical combat techniques, but also methods for channeling her growing abilities with greater precision and control. Agatha, meanwhile, continued researching everything she could find about previous selected individuals, searching for any insight that might help Elena prepare for the unusual nature of the coming trial. The training was grueling. Elena's body ached constantly during those first few days, her muscles unaccustomed to the demanding drills Grace Whitmore, assigned as her primary instructor, put her through each morning. But she pushed through the exhaustion, driven by a determination that had only grown stronger since her conversation with Damien in his study. You're improving faster than most, Grace told her one afternoon, as they took a brief rest between drills, both breathing hard from the exertion. Most warriors take months to develop the kind of instinctive reflexes you're already showing after just a week. I don't have months, Elena said, wiping sweat from her forehead. I have 2 weeks, and I intend to make the most of every single day. Grace studied her with something like respect. For what it's worth, I don't think Nathaniel and the others who doubted you understand what they're seeing. You're not fighting because you crave power or status. You're fighting because you refuse to let others decide your life for you. That's a different kind of strength than most people expect from someone new to their role. Elena appreciated the words, though she remained too focused on the immediate demands of training to dwell on them for long. Beyond the physical drills, she also worked closely with Agatha in the quiet evenings, practicing the more deliberate use of her moonlight abilities, learning to summon the silver light not only in moments of instinctive panic, but through calm, focused intention. Progress came slowly, punctuated by moments of genuine breakthrough. One evening, nearly a week into her preparation, Elena managed for the first time to summon a small, controlled burst of silver light, entirely on command, without the adrenaline of fear or danger driving the response. Agatha's careful, patient guidance had finally borne fruit, and the old woman's rare smile of approval meant more to Elena than she expected. You are learning to trust the gift rather than simply react to it, Agatha said. This is important progress. Instinctive power can protect you in sudden moments of danger, but deliberate power, called forward through your own will serve you far better in a formal trial, where you know the confrontation is coming. Throughout this period, Damien remained a steady, near-constant presence, training alongside her when his own duties allowed, offering quiet encouragement during the moments when exhaustion and doubt threatened to overwhelm her resolve. Their relationship, tentative and cautious in the weeks following the council's ruling, deepened gradually into something neither of them rushed to name, built not on the sudden intensity of a ceremonial bond, but on the slower, steadier foundation of shared purpose and genuine understanding. You don't have to prove anything to me, he told her one evening, after a particularly difficult training session had left her frustrated with her own perceived slowness to master a new technique. You've already proven more than enough, simply by refusing to let fear dictate your choices. Elena looked at him, struck by the sincerity in his expression, and felt something warm settle in her chest, something that had nothing to do with the ancient magic that had first pointed them toward each other, and everything to do with the person she was genuinely coming to know. I'm not trying to prove anything to you, she said honestly. I'm trying to prove it to myself. For years, I let other people's expectations shape how I saw my own worth. I don't want to do that anymore. Damien nodded slowly, understanding clearly written across his features. Then I admire what you're building, Elena. Not because the goddess pointed toward me, but because I've watched you become someone genuinely remarkable these past few weeks, entirely through your own effort and will. It was during this same period that Ivy finally began preparing for her departure, having decided, after much careful thought, to visit several neighboring packs friendly to Blackthorn, hoping to build connections and gather knowledge that might one day prove useful. She delayed her plans slightly, unwilling to leave, before the trial with Ashwood had been resolved, and spent her remaining days offering Elena whatever support she could, from careful strategic advice to simple, comforting companionship during the more exhausting evenings of training. I wish I could stay to see the trial through, Ivy admitted one night, as they sat together sharing a simple meal in Elena's room. But I trust you, Elena. More than that, I believe in you. Whatever Marcus Kane sends against you, I don't think he understands what he's truly facing. I appreciate that, Elena said, though I confess I don't always share your confidence. That's precisely why you'll succeed, Ivy said with a small smile. You've never been the type to charge into things with blind arrogance. You think carefully, you prepare thoroughly, and you never underestimate a challenge. That kind of careful strength tends to win more often than reckless confidence ever does. Their conversation was interrupted by an unexpected knock at the door, and when Elena opened it, she found Grace Whitmore standing outside, her expression tense and urgent. I need to speak with you privately, Grace said, glancing meaningfully at Ivy. It's important. Ivy excused herself with a quiet nod, squeezing Elena's shoulder briefly on her way out, and once the door closed behind her, Grace stepped further into the room, lowering her voice even though they were now alone. I overheard something during patrol tonight that concerns me, she said. A conversation between two of the newer pack members, ones who joined Blackthorn only recently from outside territories. They didn't realize I was close enough to hear, but they were discussing information about your training schedule, your typical routines, details that seemed far too specific for casual gossip. Elena felt a cold unease settle in her stomach. You think someone is passing information to Ashwood? I can't be certain, Grace admitted, but the timing feels suspicious, especially with the trial approaching. If Marcus Kane has someone feeding him details about your preparation, your strengths, your weaknesses, it could give his champion a significant advantage. Did you recognize either of them? Elena asked. Grace nodded slowly. One of them was a young warrior named Felix Grant. He joined Blackthorn only a few months ago, transferring from a smaller pack near the eastern border. I don't know the second one well enough to name him with certainty, but I intend to watch both of them closely from now on. Elena absorbed this information carefully, her mind racing through the implications. If someone within Blackthorn's own ranks was working against her, whether through genuine loyalty to Ashwood or simple bribery, it added a dangerous new layer of complexity to an already precarious situation. Should we tell Damien? She asked. I think we should, Grace said, but carefully. If we confront Felix Grant directly, without more concrete evidence, we risk tipping off whoever is truly behind this, giving them the chance to cover their tracks before we can identify the full scope of what's happening. They agreed to bring the concern to Damien together the following morning, and after Grace departed, Elena sat alone in the quiet of her room for a long while, turning the unsettling news over in her mind. The trial itself had already felt like a significant enough challenge to face. The possibility of betrayal from within her own pack's ranks added a weight of uncertainty that made the coming full moon feel even more distant and daunting than before. She thought of the goddess's words beside the old well, of trusting herself, despite confusion and doubt, and she resolved, as she finally settled into an uneasy sleep, that whatever challenges lay ahead, whether from Ashwood's chosen champion or from hidden enemies within her own pack, she would meet them with the same steady determination that had carried her through every difficulty since that strange, transformative night when the mark first appeared on her wrist. Damien listened carefully the next morning, as Elena and Grace explained what had been overheard, his expression growing darker with each detail. If someone within our own ranks is working against us, he said, once they had finished, I want it handled quietly and carefully. An open accusation without solid proof could tear at pack unity, right when we need it most, but I won't allow a traitor to compromise Elena's safety before this trial. He assigned 2 of his most trusted warriors to discreetly monitor Felix Grant's movements over the following days, while continuing outward preparations for the trial exactly as before, careful not to betray any awareness that his suspicions had been raised. Elena found the waiting difficult, the knowledge that someone close by might be working against her adding a persistent undercurrent of unease to every training session, every quiet meal, every ordinary interaction within the pack grounds. The truth came to light nearly a week later, faster than any of them expected. Grace found Elena during a break in afternoon training, her expression grim but satisfied. We caught him, she said quietly, pulling Elena aside from the others. Felix Grant, meeting secretly with a scout from Ashwood territory near the eastern border. He's been reporting detailed information about your training progress for the past several weeks, apparently in exchange for a promised position within Ashwood's ranks once Marcus Kane secures his prize. Elena felt a mixture of anger and relief wash over her, anger at the betrayal, relief that the uncertainty had finally been resolved. What happens now? Damien is dealing with it, Grace said. Felix will face formal consequences for his betrayal, and we've adjusted certain elements of your training strategy, knowing that some of what Ashwood learned may no longer accurately reflect your current abilities. It isn't a perfect solution, but it removes at least some of the disadvantage his information might have given them. Elena found Damien later that evening, sitting alone in his study, looking more weary than she had seen him in weeks. It's done, he told her, before she could ask. Felix confessed everything, once confronted with the evidence. He claimed he acted out of ambition, believing Ashwood offered him better opportunities than he could find within Blackthorn's more established hierarchy. He will be banished from our territory, forbidden from ever returning. Do you believe there were others involved? Elena asked. Felix insists he acted alone, without any wider conspiracy, Damien said. I am inclined to believe him, given how thoroughly he cooperated once confronted, though I intend to remain cautious regardless. Betrayal of this kind reminds us that even within our own walls, complete safety is never guaranteed. Elena settled into the chair across from his desk, feeling the weight of recent weeks pressing down on her more heavily than usual. "I keep thinking about what Marcus Kane is willing to do to claim me," she said quietly. "Bribery, manipulation, an old law twisted to justify treating a person like property. It makes me wonder what kind of champion he intends to send against me, if he's already shown himself willing to cheat before the trial has even begun." "Whatever he sends," Damien said firmly, "we will be ready. You have trained harder these past weeks than I have seen almost any warrior train in preparation for a single confrontation. Your instincts have sharpened remarkably. Your control over your abilities has grown steadier by the day, and you have proven, time and again, that you do not back down from difficulty simply because it frightens you." Elena appreciated his confidence, though a quiet uncertainty still lingered beneath her own growing resolve. "What if it isn't enough?" she asked, voicing the fear she had carried silently for days. "What if, despite everything, his champion proves stronger?" Damien rose from his desk and crossed to sit beside her, his expression softening into something gentler than the fierce determination he usually carried during discussions of the trial. "Then we will face that outcome together, and I will not stop fighting for your right to choose your own future, regardless of what any old law claims to decide. But Elena, I do not believe it will come to that. I have watched you grow into someone remarkable these past weeks, not because the goddess demanded it of you, but because you demanded it of yourself. That kind of strength, chosen freely rather than simply granted by circumstance, tends to prove far more resilient than anyone expects." His words settled something unsettled deep within her chest, and for a long moment, they simply sat together in comfortable silence, the quiet warmth of the study a small refuge from the mounting pressure of the days ahead. Elena found herself, in that quiet moment, allowing herself to fully acknowledge the feelings that had been steadily growing between them, feelings built not on the sudden intensity of ceremonial magic, but on weeks of genuine partnership, honest conversation, and mutual respect earned through shared adversity. "Thank you," she said softly, "for believing in me, even when I struggled to believe in myself." "Always," Damien said, and the simple sincerity in the word carried more weight than any elaborate declaration could have offered. The remaining days before the full moon passed in a blur of intensified preparation, Elena pushing herself harder with each passing session, determined to enter the trial as fully prepared as circumstances would allow. Ivy delayed her departure once more, unwilling to leave before witnessing the outcome of a confrontation that would determine so much about her closest friend's future, and Agatha continued her careful research, searching for any final insight that might strengthen Elena's chances. On the evening before the full moon, the entire pack gathered for a quiet ceremony of blessing, Caleb Ashford leading solemn prayers for Elena's protection and success, the assembled warriors offering words of support that, weeks earlier, Elena might never have expected to receive with such genuine warmth. Even Nathaniel Ford approached her afterward, his expression carrying none of the earlier skepticism that had colored their first encounter. "I misjudged you," he said simply. "I watched you train these past weeks, watched you handle Felix Grant's betrayal with more grace than most would manage, watched you refuse every opportunity to simply demand deference rather than earning genuine respect. Whatever tomorrow brings, know that you go into that trial with the support of warriors who once doubted you, myself included." Elena thanked him sincerely, moved by the transformation in his attitude, and as the pack gathering finally dispersed into the quiet darkness of the evening before the trial, she felt something steady and resolute settle over her, replacing the lingering anxiety that had haunted her throughout the weeks of preparation. Tomorrow, beneath the full moon, she would face whatever champion Marcus Kane sent against her, and whatever the outcome, she would meet it not as a frightened, uncertain young woman thrust unwillingly into a role she never sought, but as someone who had chosen, deliberately and with full understanding of the stakes, to fight for her own future. The trial ground had been prepared at the neutral clearing along the border between Blackthorn and Ashwood territories, a wide, flat expanse of grass encircled by ancient trees, chosen generations ago as the traditional site for exactly this kind of formal confrontation between packs. By the time Elena arrived alongside Damien and a substantial contingent of Blackthorn warriors, the clearing was already filling with observers, neutral elders from several surrounding packs arriving to witness and adjudicate the proceedings, drawn by curiosity about the rare spectacle of a genuine selected facing formal challenge. The full moon hung directly overhead, enormous and brilliant, bathing the entire clearing in silver light that seemed, to Elena's now attuned senses, to hum with quiet, expectant energy. She could feel her mark pulsing steadily beneath her sleeve, warm and alive, and she drew a slow, deliberate breath, calling on the calm focus she had spent weeks carefully cultivating. Marcus Kane arrived shortly after, flanked by his own contingent of Ashwood warriors, his expression carrying the confident, calculating look of a man fully convinced of his eventual victory. Beside him walked a tall, broad-shouldered warrior Elena did not recognize, his posture radiating the kind of coiled, dangerous strength that spoke of extensive combat experience. "This is Owen Blackwood," Marcus announced, addressing the assembled crowd with practiced formality. "Champion of Ashwood, undefeated in 11 formal trials, he will represent our claim this evening." Elena studied her opponent carefully, noting the confident set of his shoulders, the calculating way his eyes swept over her, clearly assessing her as an opponent he expected to overcome with relative ease. She felt a flicker of doubt, quickly pushed aside by the memory of weeks of hard-earned preparation, of Grace's patient instruction, of Agatha's careful guidance, of Damien's steady, unwavering confidence in her ability to rise to this challenge. Caleb Ashford stepped forward to address the gathered crowd, his voice carrying clearly across the silent clearing. "This trial is conducted under the old laws, witnessed by neutral elders from surrounding territories, to determine the rightful claim over a selected of the moon goddess. The combat will continue until one party yields, is incapacitated, or until the neutral elders determine a clear victor. Do both champions understand and accept these terms?" "We do," Marcus Kane said, his confident smile never wavering. Elena stepped forward, meeting Owen Blackwood's calculating gaze directly. "I accept," she said, her voice steady, despite the pounding of her heart. The elders retreated to the edges of the clearing, and a hushed anticipation settled over the assembled crowd, as Elena and Owen took their positions at opposite ends of the wide grass expanse. Damien caught her eye from where he stood among the Blackthorn observers, offering a single, steady nod of encouragement, and Elena felt something in her chest settle into place, calm and resolute. Caleb raised his hand, held it aloft for a long, suspended moment, and then dropped it sharply. "Begin." Owen moved first, faster than his size suggested he should be capable of, closing the distance between them in a blur of motion that would have caught Elena entirely off guard weeks earlier. But her training had prepared her for exactly this kind of speed, and she pivoted smoothly aside, avoiding his initial strike while summoning a controlled burst of silver light toward his exposed flank. The light struck him solidly, staggering his momentum, though he recovered faster than she expected, spinning to face her again with renewed intensity. Elena backed away carefully, maintaining distance, drawing on the deliberate control she had spent so many evenings practicing, with Agatha's guidance, feeling the moonlight overhead respond to her focused intention with increasing precision. Owen pressed his advantage aggressively, forcing her into a rapid exchange of strikes and dodges that tested every reflex her weeks of physical training had honed. Elena held her ground, meeting his strength with speed and careful positioning, refusing to let his considerable size advantage overwhelm her more agile defense. Each time he closed the distance, she answered with precise, controlled bursts of silver light, wearing down his stamina through persistent, calculated pressure, rather than any single decisive blow. The battle stretched on, the assembled crowd watching in tense silence as the exchange continued beneath the enormous full moon, and gradually, Elena began to notice her opponent's movements growing slightly less crisp, his breathing more labored, the confident calculation in his eyes replaced by something closer to genuine effort and growing uncertainty. She thought of the goddess's words beside the old well, of trusting herself despite doubt, of the strength that had always lived within her, simply waiting for circumstances that demanded she finally let it show. She drew on that memory now, feeling her connection to the moonlight overhead deepen and strengthen, the silver light responding to her focused determination with growing intensity. Owen lunged once more, a powerful, committed strike aimed at overwhelming her defenses entirely, but Elena had anticipated exactly this kind of desperate final push. She sidestepped smoothly, and as he stumbled slightly off balance from his own momentum, she summoned the largest, most controlled burst of silver light she had yet managed, striking him squarely and sending him to the ground with a force that left him unable to immediately rise. The clearing fell utterly silent. Owen struggled for a long moment, attempting to push himself upright, but his strength had clearly been exhausted by the sustained exchange, and after several difficult seconds, he sank back to the grass, raising one hand in the clear, unmistakable gesture of yielding. Caleb Ashford stepped forward immediately, his voice carrying clearly across the stunned silence of the clearing. The champion yields. Victory belongs to Elena Voss, selected of the Moon Goddess. A roar of triumphant celebration erupted from the assembled Blackthorn observers, and Elena stood in the center of the clearing, breathing hard, her entire body trembling with the aftermath of adrenaline and effort, disbelief, and triumph warring in equal measure inside her chest. She had done it. She had actually done it. Marcus Kane's confident expression had crumbled into something far less composed, his jaw tight with barely controlled frustration, as he moved to help Owen rise from the grass. He offered no gracious words of acknowledgement, simply nodding stiffly toward Caleb Ashford before turning to lead his contingent away from the clearing, defeat clearly a bitter and unfamiliar experience for a man so accustomed to easy victory. Damien reached Elena's side within moments, his expression a mixture of relief, pride, and something warmer still that made her breath catch despite her exhaustion. "You did it," he said softly, his hands settling gently on her shoulders as he studied her carefully for any sign of injury. "We did it," Elena corrected, a tired but genuine smile spreading across her face. "I couldn't have prepared for this without everyone's help. Yours, Grace's, Agatha's, Ivy's, steady support through everything." "Perhaps," Damien said, "but it was your own strength that carried you through that clearing tonight, Elena. No one else could have stood in your place." The assembled Blackthorn warriors surrounded her then, offering enthusiastic congratulations, Nathaniel Ford among the loudest voices of praise, his earlier skepticism now replaced entirely by genuine, unreserved respect. Grace embraced her tightly, tears of relief and pride bright in her eyes, and even the neutral elders from surrounding packs approached to offer their formal acknowledgement of her victory, murmuring words about the rare privilege of witnessing a true selected prove her strength so decisively. As the celebration continued around her, Elena found a quiet moment to simply stand beneath the enormous full moon, feeling its silver light settle warmly over her exhausted but triumphant body, and she thought, with a clarity that had been building steadily throughout these past difficult weeks, that she had finally found something she had been searching for, without fully realizing it. Not simply victory, not simply power, but a genuine sense of belonging, earned entirely through her own effort and courage, standing exactly where she was always meant to stand. News of the trial's outcome spread quickly beyond Blackthorn's own borders, carried by the neutral elders who had witnessed the confrontation firsthand, and within days, word had reached nearly every pack in the surrounding territories. Elena found herself, in the weeks that followed, becoming something of a quiet legend, spoken of with a mixture of respect and curiosity, by pack members and outside visitors alike. She adjusted to the attention slowly, still uncomfortable with the weight of so many curious eyes, but steadied always by the genuine support of those closest to her. Ivy finally departed on her long-planned journey, shortly after the trial, embracing Elena tightly at the pack's northern gate on a bright, clear morning. "I'll write often," she promised, tears bright in her eyes, despite her obvious excitement for the adventure ahead. "And I'll come back to visit long before you have time to properly miss me." "I already miss you," Elena said, laughing softly through her own threatening tears. "Go. See the world. You've earned every bit of this freedom, Ivy." They embraced once more, and Elena watched her closest friend walk away down the northern road, her heart full of a bittersweet mixture of pride and quiet ache, grateful beyond measure for the loyalty that had carried their friendship through even the strangest and most difficult of circumstances. Nathaniel Ford, in the weeks following the trial, became something of an unexpected ally, offering his considerable combat experience to help refine Elena's ongoing training, his earlier skepticism transformed into genuine mentorship. Grace remained a steady, trusted friend, and Agatha continued her patient guidance, though even the old woman admitted, with evident satisfaction, that Elena had grown well beyond needing quite so much careful instruction. It was nearly a month after the trial, on another clear night beneath a moon just beginning its climb back toward fullness, that the entire pack gathered once more in the main courtyard, summoned by an announcement that had spread through Blackthorn with unusual urgency. Elena arrived to find the courtyard already filled, the assembled crowd murmuring with anticipation. And as she made her way toward the front, she saw Damien standing near the center, his expression carrying a mixture of nervousness and quiet resolve she had rarely seen him display so openly. Above the courtyard, the moonlight began to shift and gather, coalescing slowly into a soft, luminous shape that drew a collective gasp from the assembled crowd. Elena recognized the presence immediately, the same warm, ancient energy she had felt beside the old well weeks earlier, now manifesting visibly for the entire pack to witness. The moon goddess's presence settled over the courtyard like a gentle blessing, her voice, though carrying no distinct physical form, resonating clearly enough for every gathered wolf to hear. "I have watched this pack navigate uncertainty with courage and honesty," the voice said, warm and resonant. "I chose Elena Voss not to overturn the structures you have built, but to remind you that true strength lies not in rigid tradition alone, but in the willingness to recognize truth, even when it challenges what you believed you already understood. She has proven herself worthy of the trust I placed in her, not through the power I granted, but through the courage and integrity she brought to wielding it." A soft murmur of awe rippled through the crowd, and Elena felt tears prick at her eyes, moved beyond words by the public acknowledgement of a journey that had begun, weeks earlier, with such painful uncertainty and heartbreak. "To this pack," the voice continued, "I offer my blessing, and my trust that you will continue to honor both tradition and truth in equal measure, allowing each to strengthen rather than diminish the other." The luminous presence began to fade, and as the final traces of silver light dissolved back into ordinary moonlight, Damien stepped forward, addressing the assembled crowd with a steadiness that carried clearly across the quiet courtyard. "I have spent these past weeks reflecting on everything that has happened since the night of my original selection ceremony," he said. "I made a choice then, based on expectation rather than genuine understanding, and though that choice caused pain, I deeply regret. It also led, eventually, to a truth I might never have discovered otherwise." He turned to face Elena directly, and the courtyard fell into hushed, expectant silence. "I am not asking you to accept any title tonight," he said, his voice softening as he addressed her alone, though the words carried clearly to every listening ear. "I know you have spent these past months proving, again and again, that your worth was never dependent on any bond, any ceremony, any title bestowed by tradition or ritual magic. I only want to ask, honestly and without any expectation attached, whether you would choose to continue building what has grown between us these past months. Not because ancient magic pointed us toward each other, but because it is genuinely what you want for your own future." Elena felt the weight of the entire courtyard's attention settle around her, but for the first time since that painful night of rejection so many months earlier, she found she did not mind the scrutiny at all. She thought of everything the journey had taught her, of the strength she had discovered within herself, of the genuine partnership and respect that had grown steadily between herself and Damien through weeks of shared adversity and honest conversation. "I choose this," she said softly, "not because the goddess demanded it, and not because tradition expects it. I choose it because these past months, getting to know you honestly, watching you support me, without ever trying to overshadow my own strength, have shown me something I never expected to find. A partnership built on genuine respect, rather than simple expectation." The courtyard erupted into warm, genuine celebration, entirely different in tone from the confused, painful applause that had greeted her that first fateful night of the original selection ceremony. Elena found herself surrounded by the warmth of a pack that had watched her earn her place among them through courage, honesty, and hard-won strength, rather than simply granting her deference because ancient magic demanded it. In the months that followed, Elena settled gradually into her role as the pack's selected, working alongside Damien, not as a simple ceremonial partner, but as a genuine equal, her unique abilities and steady wisdom becoming an integral part of how Blackthorn navigated the challenges that inevitably arose. Ivy's letters arrived regularly from her travels, filled with excitement about the new packs and traditions she encountered, and though Elena missed her closest friend deeply, She took genuine comfort in knowing Ivy had finally found the freedom to build a life entirely of her own choosing. Nathaniel Ford became one of Elena's most trusted advisors. His early skepticism transformed into deep, genuine respect. Grace continued as a close friend and steady training companion, and Agatha, in her final years, took quiet, evident pride in having guided Elena through the earliest and most confusing days of her transformation. Standing once more beside the old northern well, nearly a year after that first strange silver light had first caught her eye, Elena found herself reflecting on how far the journey had carried her. She had arrived at this same spot as a heartbroken young woman, certain her future had been decided by someone else's choice, certain her worth was tied entirely to whether Damien Cross had chosen her as his Luna. She understood now, with a clarity that felt earned rather than simply granted, that her true worth had never depended on any single ceremony or bond. It had been there all along, waiting quietly beneath years of self-doubt and deference to others' expectations, waiting for circumstances brave enough to finally let it show. The moonlight settled warmly over her shoulders as she turned to make her way back toward the pack house, toward Damien, toward the steady, genuine partnership they had built together through months of honest struggle and hard-earned trust. Whatever challenges the future still held, Elena Voss walked toward them now, not as someone waiting anxiously for others to decide her fate, but as someone who had learned, finally and completely, to trust the strength that had always been genuinely her own.